hit record. Okay, I'm going to kind of go off book for a second. This is a form. This isn't mentioned in the syllabus for us to talk about in this class, so I call this a bonus form because I think this is a really good form and it's worth mentioning. This is the professional services disclosure and election. Guys, this is our form. This is the form we can use to help ourselves and possibly help keep ourselves out of trouble. So this form, you see the property address, buyer, seller, or seller, and the firm. And what we're going to ask the buyer or seller to do is come through and either waive or select services that may or may not be relevant to this transactions, things that parties may or may not want to consider looking at during that contract to closing process. So you can see here, I mean, we need an attorney at some point. Is there home warranty? Various inspections, home inspection, HVAC, pool spot, etc. There's our pest inspection, come down a little further, insurance, mortgage loan survey, etc. So what we're doing is we're going through and having the buyer select or save that they want, select or waive that they want the service during that contract to closing process. If they select the service, who orders it? Am I going to order it? Is the buyer or seller going to order it? And then who's going to provide that service? This is, again, this is our form, you guys. Any of your firms requiring this? I see head shaking. Yeah. Most of us that are affiliated, our firms have started using this as part of that mandatory paperwork in the transaction. I'm telling you guys right now, let me say, first off, having the buyer or seller waive the service may not necessarily be enough. We still need to have a conversation about what they're waiving. So for example, if the buyer wants to waive the survey, if it goes down and you find yourself in front of a judge or the real estate commission, this form alone isn't going to be sufficient. It's just going to show that the buyer initialed here. So in addition to having them waive that service, we need some kind of documentation that we explain to them what they're waiving when they waive the survey. Having that conversation that we explain to them the importance of a survey and why they should get the survey. Same thing with the home inspection, pest inspection, that kind of thing. I think as long as we have the buyer seller waiving the various service, and then again, we have that documented conversation that we explain the importance, what it was, and the importance of it, that definitely gives us a stronger leg to stand on. There's been numerous cases. I had a teammate a couple of years ago. She got the letter of inquiry, that dreaded brown envelope from the real estate commission. They were buyers of hers, cash buyers. They were going to save money on the home inspection and they were going to waive it. She said, "Are you sure? You know, the home inspection tells you everything wrong with the home. You know what you're getting yourself into." No. All right. They initialed this. And obviously that whole conversation about waiving the home inspection went down via text. So she had her documentation. Guess what happened after closing? They found problems with the home. They wanted them fixed. Who'd they go after first? Their agent. They filed a complaint. Agent got the letter of inquiry. She responded with her agency agreement, signed agency agreement, this form, text communications. The next thing she heard back from the commission was, "Thank you for cooperation. This matter has been resolved. It has been closed." So I know for a fact this form has gotten a lot of our peers off the hook. Again, having them waive it isn't enough. We still need to show that we have a conversation. I like another thing I like about this form with the survey, tells us to see below. So it gives us a note regarding surveys. So again, when we're explaining the importance of the survey, it kind of helps puts words in our mouth. It gives us information that we can use to explain. And basically what we're saying here is if the buyer waives the survey and there's something discovered after closing, after the buyer owns the property, and there's something that was discovered that affects the title that could have been found had they had a survey done, title insurance isn't going to cover them. Title insurance is going to say, you should have had a survey for it discovered and let the seller take care of it before they transfer title. So if nothing else, I think that's a really good point for people to consider when deciding if they want the survey. Also having them select or waive while we're under contract. Don't show up with this form at the settlement table and say, by the way, I need you to select or waive the service. By then it's kind of late, isn't it? So we're kind of using this as helping us with the conversations about the importance of having these various services, if applicable. Comments on this one? As mentioned, my firm, like I said, this is in our required documents. Like I'm not going to get paid if we don't have this in our transaction file. It's a CYA form. We're covering ourselves. All right. Other forms, now back to the syllabus. We talked about this the other day. Now we're just showing you we have a form for this. Our contract says that if the buyer fails to deliver their due diligence or their earnest money on time, or if either one of those bounce, then the seller provides written notice to the buyer, in which case the buyer has one banking day to deliver readily available funds. So either they haven't delivered the due diligence or the earnest money on time, or they did deliver them and they bounce. So now the seller's saying, okay, I give you written notice, which case that written notice, you have one banking day. If the buyer doesn't deliver within one banking day, then the seller shall have the right to terminate. So what you're looking at here in the bullet points, this is directly from our offer to purchase and contract. And the offer to purchase and contract, it's a paragraph. Here they just put it in bullet points for us. And what we're doing is satisfying the seller's must to deliver that written notice. Now, technically, written notice can be in an email, it can be on a subway napkin. Technically, it doesn't matter how that written notice is delivered, but this form is just one way to do it. Nice, clean, and goes along with the transaction. The buyer has failed to deliver either or both, or the funds have been dishonored. Seller hereby demands, I love that. Seller demands that buyer deliver cash, official bank check, wire transfer, electronic transfer. Again, no personal check allowed. This is readily available funds either. I mean, your first check to me bounced. I don't want another check from you. I want to know that you have the money in the bank. And only the seller has to sign this because they're delivering that notice to the buyer that either you're late or it bounced and you have that one day. Firm may have a policy. Your firm may want you to use the form. The firm may just say email's fine. So just check with your firm. Thank you. Questions on this one?
So if the buyer doesn't pay and they've got the one day, you're basically sending, this is what the seller's sending? Is this a
Yes.
form that I want out then?
Yep.
Okay.
No. I don't want out. This is the seller providing written notice
Right, but it's
to
the
give the
form that
buyer
I
the one
would,
banking day.
it's the form that I would have to attach essentially, not get out of it, but.
It's
understand
just,
what you're saying.
yep. It's just the seller delivering that written notice. And again, you know, the rule doesn't specify we have to use this form. written notices, email, right? It's on a piece of paper, whatever. This is just a nice, neat, clean way to do it because all the verbiage is here to get with your firm. Other questions on this one? Response to buyer's offer. This is one we talked about when we were talking about multiple offer situations. Now understand, this form has always been around, but this form got new life breathed into it when we came into this multiple offer situation world that we're living in right now, because it was very helpful to have something to allow the sellers to communicate with the buyers and to respond to their offer. So again, let's think of this as a letter from the seller to the buyer. Buyer's made an offer. Now the seller's going to use this to respond. You can see, we're going to go through these, but we actually have 3 choices here. And the seller's instructed to only check one box. So we're going to use this form for one scenario. First scenario, thank you for your offer to purchase. We cannot accept the offer as written and hereby reject it. While this is not a counter offer, we would favorably consider the following changes. And then the seller has the opportunity to basically put their cards on the table. Prior to the multiple offer situation world that we're in today, where we saw this was that low ball offer, that insultingly low offer. Sometimes when it's so low, the parties wonder if a counter offer is worth it, right? If the seller's up here and the buyer's way down here, how much closer are we going to get with a couple counters? So this way, this might be an opportunity for the seller to say, look, I'm rejecting your offer. It's rejected. I'm not creating a counter offer. I'm just telling you, this is what I would consider favorable. These are the terms. If you can get it up here, we'll talk. If not, it's a done deal. We just rejected it. This goes on to say, if the above changes are acceptable, please submit another offer with the noted changes. Please understand that until an offer has been accepted, we are free to consider and may at any time accept any other offers to purchase that contain terms and conditions satisfactory to us in our sole discretion. So like what we were talking about before break, the seller is free to accept any offer at any time. So even if they respond to the buyer's offer, they don't have to wait for them to decide if they're going to make a new offer or not. Does that make sense? And that's what the seller's telling the buyer. While you're deciding if another offer comes in, we're free to accept it. It might be the scenario we were talking about before lunch and the multiple offer world where you get 10 offers and none of them are good. None of them are good. If that's the case, you may want to revisit your pricing. It may not have been priced, but another thing we could reject all 10 of those offers using this letter and kind of giving everybody the opportunity to come up to whatever we put in here as the seller's favorable terms. So one option is to reject it and have the seller put their cards on the table. The second option is new because of the multiple offer world that we've been in. So this second provision was added in this crazy world. It says, thank you for your offer. Be advised that we intend to consider all offers on the property received by, and we're told to put in a date and time. Should you choose to submit another offer, we encourage you to submit your best offer as soon as possible and in no event later than the date and time set forth in the preceding sentence. If you neither submit another offer nor withdraw your current offer, we will consider your current offer along with the others. And again, please understand, the seller is free to accept any offer that they want at any time. So we don't have to wait for you to decide. And then the third choice is the politest no I've ever seen in my entire life. Thank you for your offer. We cannot accept the offer as written and hereby reject it. Have a nice day. It's the only thing missing from that. Have a nice day. So it's just a flat out no. And again, rejection can come in any written form, in any form. This is just a nice, neat way to list it. If you're a paper trail kind of person, here's a piece of paper you can use. Only the seller signs this because the seller is responding to the buyer's offer. So again, any response is fine. You could do all this in an email, that's fine, but your firm may want you to use the nice, neat, clean form just to help with that paper trail. Questions on this one? Then we have our due diligence, request, and agreement. This is what we're going to use. We can ask for repairs using this form if the seller agrees to do repairs. This is the form that we're going to use: due diligence, request, and agreement. Based upon the buyer's due diligence, the buyer requests and the seller agrees to the following. And then we need to spell out exactly what it is we want the seller to repair or improve. Don't leave this up for chance. I think we can all agree that repairs and anything about the property during the contract to closing is subjective. It depends on whose eyes you're looking through. Are you looking through the buyer's eyes or the seller's eyes? So if you put in here, fix the electrical, does that help the seller out? Is that real specific? I mean, you could change the light bulb. Haven't you fixed the electrical problem? So we need to put something specific. What is it that we want the seller to fix about the electrical? Don't leave it up to chance. Don't leave it up to misinterpretation. A lot of our home inspectors have a program that allow us to kind of pull apart different pieces of the home inspection. So we might be able to pull apart just that about the electrical. That gives the seller the problem, the pictures, what needs to be done to correct it, right? That definitely gives more information. We need your buyer's permission to share the home inspection report, which we'll see in just a second. So we can only share the home inspection report with the seller if the buyer gives us our portion of the home inspection report, if we have that permission. Sellers generally don't like this. They want the home inspection report because it's on their property. But guess what? The report is the property of the buyer because they're the one that paid for it. So the buyer decides if they release that report or not. So we're going to carefully spell out, make sure you're clear about what repairs your buyer's asking for. And again, if you can include that portion of the home inspection, definitely best where everybody can see we're on the same page. The other thing we mentioned is if you want to put verbiage in here about to be performed by a certified electrician or to be repaired by a general contractor, instead of leaving it up to that seller to repair it in a good and workmanlike manner. So if you want to specify who is to make this repair, then this is where we're going to do that as well. If you run out of room, get you a blank piece of paper and keep typing. Again, we need to be as specific and as detailed as we can so we don't leave anything up for misinterpretation. In the event the parties have agreed to any adjustment in the condition of the property, then such adjustment shall be completed prior to settlement. There's that good and workmanlike manner. Seller shall notify buyer upon completion of the above and provide buyer with documentation thereof. Buyer shall have the right to verify that the items have been complete in that good and workmanlike manner. Such verification shall be at the buyer's expense. And then I got a couple blue notes. We mentioned earlier that when it comes to repairs, I mean, we're pretty much entering into round 2 of negotiations with the repair request. And when it comes to asking for repairs, it might be we come up with some other solution besides the repair themselves. So maybe in lieu of repairs, the seller pays some buyer's closing costs, or in lieu of repairs, we reduce the purchase price, right? If the parties are willing to work together, then sometimes, especially here, we can help them come up with some creative solutions to help both parties. We want a win-win, right? Both parties win-win. So if we're going to do something other than the repair themselves, then we're reminded here to look at our agreement to amend the contract. And that's what will allow us to either reduce the purchase price or renegotiate those seller pay closing costs. So we will look at the agreement to amend in just a bit. And then the other blue note says buyer retains the right to conduct due diligence during the period decided as the due diligence period in the contract. Buyers advised to consult with their lender regarding this agreement or any other prior to the expiration of due diligence. This is where the buyer either does or does not release their home inspection or a portion of their home inspection to the seller. This agreement becomes effective on the date. All changes must be written, signed by the both parties. Remember, you guys, when it comes to repairs, I need any agreed upon repairs in writing and signed by both parties, especially the seller, while we are still in due diligence. The repairs themselves don't have to be complete until prior to settlement. But this form being signed while we're still in due diligence, this now contractually obligates the seller to do those repairs. And remember, the whole point of the buyer's due diligence is to learn as much about the property as they possibly can to decide if they want to move forward or not. So when they're deciding if they want to move forward or not, we need the seller's signature. We need to know that the seller's going to, whether or not they're going to do these repairs or not. So this is our due diligence request and agreement. Questions on this one, comments? Another one we haven't been doing, I mean, sellers in the last couple of years in the crazy sellers market, they haven't had to fix much. But as we see ourselves come back into a buyer's market with the buyers taking control again, we're going to see lots of repairs being done. More so than what we have in the last few years, at least. Here is our agreement to amend the contract. An amendment does what? Remind me what an amendment does.
Change.
That's right. An amendment is a change. So we have a contract. And now here we are, for whatever reason, pick a reason. For whatever reason, we've entered into round 2 of negotiations. So we have an amendment. A recent update they did was they gave us amendment number. So if you're, round 3 of negotiations, round 4 of negotiations, we can always say which one we're amending. Starts with a big red warning. All parties, including the lender and settlement agent, must be provided a copy of this agreement. So remember when we went under contract, we sent a copy of the contract to the lender and the attorney, right? Now that we're amending the contract, we need to get that change to the lender and to the attorney. When you are reviewing the closing disclosure for this transaction, you want to make sure that you have the amended amounts, the amended changes on the closing disclosure. So use this to help you verify that for accuracy. And then you can see buyer and seller hereby agree to amend the contract as set forth below. Basically, the things that they can agree to amend are the blanks that we filled in to begin with when we were when we were forming this contract. So if we're going to agree to change the purchase price, the addition of earnest money, when is that earnest money deposit date, that additional earnest money? If it's new construction and you're going to renegotiate or add a building deposit, we can do that here. If we want to extend the due diligence period, we can use this form. One thing that may make the seller more agreeable to more time is to offer them more money. So we can renegotiate that due diligence fee and that due diligence period if the parties agree. If we're going to change escrow agents, this has been happening a lot lately because the really good settlement agents, the really good closing attorneys are booked in some cases for months. And we may not be able to get to our attorney in time. So when we go under contract, we think we're going to use our attorney. We try to schedule closing and we find out they don't have any availabilities till like August. So now we got to change the escrow agent. So this form allows us to do that. Acknowledge receipt of the earnest money deposit of the new escrow agent. Settlement date. Do we remember from our contract that we have a 7-day delay built into the contract? The parties can also always renegotiate that settlement date. The delaying party can ask for more time, and the parties could agree on a new settlement date. Understand, like a big boom outside my house. If something happens. Okay, that was weird. So if we do agree to a new settlement date, we still have that 7-day delay. So if we renegotiate the date, we have a new date, there's a 7-day delay, unless you check this box. If you check this box, we're agreeing to a new settlement date, now only with a 4-day delay. So we still allow for a little delay. But if we're going to check this box, instead of a 7-day delay from our newly negotiated settlement date, then it's going to be a 4-day delay. Seller pay closing costs, if that's something we renegotiate, move repairs, for example. And if we want to renegotiate a home warranty, again, it might be that the buyer wants repairs and the seller says, I don't want to mess with it. Let me just buy you a home warranty, right? So when it comes to repairs, know that there's other things other than the repair themselves. I always say a true negotiation, a successful negotiation is not a I win, you lose. A successful negotiation is we win. So sometimes helping the parties come up with those, you know, what would be successful for both, whatever the parties can agree to. Buyer signs on the left, seller signs on the right. Again, your firm may have a policy. They may allow you to cross through the purchase price on the contract, write in the new purchase price, and have everybody initial and date it. You guys remember from looking at our contract, we don't have a lot of wiggle room to write stuff, do we? We don't have a lot of extra room in the margins. So a lot of firms, mine included, is saying, look, they give you a form, just use this. It keeps everything nice, neat, and clean, and it gives us our paper trail. Questions on the agreement to amend?
Do you have multiple amendments, like multiple ones of these? Do they supersede each other, or do they work in tandem?
So that's a great question, Matthew. And I think the answer is it kind of depends what we're amending, right? So if we change the purchase price, amendment one, and then we renegotiate and change the purchase price again, amendment 2, then amendment 2 is going to supersede amendment 1 because that's the most recent agreement. That's what we decided on last. I think in practice, where we're more applicable to see different amendments, maybe we first renegotiate more time, and then we come back and we renegotiate seller paid expenses. You know what I'm saying? So amending different things at different times. But to your point, if we're amending the same thing at different times, the last is always going to win because that was the latest agreement between the two. Other questions on this one? Additional signatures addendum. We talked about this. Our agency agreements and our offer to purchase and contract only gives us a place for 2 parties to sign. So if you need more than 2, we got, I think there's 8 more here. I counted them once. We got 8 more here who's signing it. If you have more than this, then you do another additional signatures addendum. You keep adding as many additional signatures addendum as you need to get all parties to sign. I need everybody on board from day one. If I have 26 people that are on the deed and all 26 of those people are married, I need a calculator for that math, right? How many people have to show up to settlement? If that's the case, I need to know everybody's on board from day one. Could you imagine Some people sign the listing agreement, some of them sign the contract, not all of them show up to closing. You just wasted all your time and marketing money and advertising, didn't you? You wasted everybody's time. So get everybody on board from day one, because if you don't have everybody on board from day one, my little red flag would go up of whether or not we're going to have everybody on board at the closing table. So for many of these as you need. And you can see this one also comes with the guidelines for complete. So it references, if a form comes with the guidelines, it references the guidelines for us. We'll come back to that one. We'll come back to some of these. Let me see what else I got. Hang on. I think we'll come back to most of these. Yeah. Let me go ahead and talk about these real quick because we're just kind of looking at them. In the event that the seller agrees to act as the financing device. So the buyer's going to buy, and instead of paying a lender, they're going to pay the seller. A seller financing addendum will be attached to 2T, and this addresses the terms of that financing. How is the buyer going to pay X amount per month for however many months, etc. I see seller financing offered mostly with like large tracts of land. Sometimes when you're driving down the road and you see like a huge sign, it says like 45 plus or minus acres, and then it might say seller financing available. But understand you can do seller financing on any property, condo, land, whatever. And I think the last one we're going to talk about for the time being anyway, is that the buyer's going to assume the seller's loan. So we have a loan assumption addendum. Just kind of spells out the specifics of the loan. And like we said earlier, when we were talking about this at the beginning of the day, the buyer still has to qualify through the lender. So even though the seller's loan may be assumable, even though they could assume it, the buyer still has to approve the lender. So they still have to go through that process, underwriting, all that good stuff. And the buyer will just bring the difference. So they'll take over the seller's loan, and then the remaining of the balance, that's what they will bring to settlement. Either they have cash or they're obtaining a loan for that amount. Loan assumption addendum.
Can I ask a question about the loan
Please.
assumption?
Please.
If the loan assumption, here in Texas, they only do it for FHA and VA, how common is it for conventional there?
Not right now, not that common, but again, I have a feeling we're getting ready to see that coming back, depending on the type of, depending on the lender, obviously. And then I also say, depending on how far into the loan that person is, so we're not dealing with it much here at the time being, but I have a feeling it's getting ready to. And you're right, VA and FHA loans are assumable, which means as long as the buyer qualifies, they can assume. A non-vet can assume a VA loan as long as they qualify. Yep, as long as they qualify. Conventional loan, remember FHA and VA loans are backed by the government. So there's regulations, there's governmental regulations in place. Conventional loans have no backing. So a lot of times those are regulated by the lenders themselves, because there's no government involved. Other questions on these? Anything we've talked about so far? Okay. We'll come back and look at some more of these. Maybe we'll look at some more this afternoon, look at some more tomorrow. For your test tomorrow, you'll need to have these things memorized word for word so you can answer a very detailed question about them. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. For your test tomorrow, breathe, y'all. For your test tomorrow, you're going to be given a scenario. it's gonna plop you in a situation. It's gonna say, which addendum should you use? Which addenda should you use? So that's why we're going through these, just having a basic understanding. I believe I made you guys promise me last weekend that you were not sending anything to a buyer or seller without you looking it over first, understanding it yourself first. That does include any applicable addenda and amendments, all of our paperwork, you guys. So we'll come back and look at some more of these. In the meantime, let's finish up chapter 11. And the last little piece of chapter 11 are alternative conveyance methods. So you may have a situation where the traditional sale, residential commercial sale doesn't apply. In which case the parties may agree to an alternative method. And so these are some more common ones that we're getting ready to talk about. Understand there are others though. I mean, guys, basically the buyer and the seller can agree to whatever they want as long as it's not illegal. So they can come up with whatever they want to. We don't have the form for it. We just have to have an attorney. An example of one common alternative conveyance method that we're not going to talk about in this section, but I think is probably the most common, would be like, for example, a lease to own. So if you have a tenant living there, they may say, I'll lease for X amount of time, and at the end of that amount of time, I'm going to purchase the property. So that would be an alternative method for conveying property. So specifically in this section, we're going to talk about installment land contracts. We're going to talk about option to purchase contracts, and we're going to talk about preemptive rights. Again, knowing that these aren't our only options, they're just the ones that we're discussing. So first off, we have our installment land contract. In an installment land contract, the buyer's buying the property. The buyer's paying the seller the purchase price. They're just not doing it in one lump sum. They're paying the seller in installments. They're taking that purchase price up. The parties will agree how much and for how long, because they're going to be interest charged, et cetera, et cetera. So the buyer's paying for the property. They're just doing it in installments. And in an installment land contract, the buyer gets equitable title, which means they have possession. They have the right to live there. If they want to profit from it, they have that right. But the seller keeps the legal title until that last installment payment is made. You may remember hearing about in pre-licensing a purchase money mortgage. Purchase money mortgage is a fancy way of saying seller financing. Seller financing and installment land contracts are very similar. The difference between the two is when the deed changes hands. In seller financing, the deed changes hands at closing, and then the buyer pays the seller. An installment land contract, the buyer doesn't get the deed until that last installment payment is made. So until then, the seller keeps the equitable title, the legal title, so they have something in the event of the buyer's default. So the parties, the vendor is the givor of the installment land contract. That's who we're going to refer to as the seller. The vendee is the buyer, the receivee of the installment land contract. These things are unique because it involves three pieces. The seller agrees to sell and the buyer agrees to buy, and the seller also acts as the financing device. So instead of paying the bank or the mortgage company directly, the buyer's just making payments to the seller. Again, when that last payment is made, they'll get the deed. Because of this third piece, because the seller or the vendor being the financing device, our standard offer to purchase and contract will not work. We don't have verbiage, we don't have language in here to allow for that financing device. So because of that, and I don't have another pre-printed form for it, so if we do an installment land contract, we'll have to have an attorney draft that agreement up for the parties. As the listing agent, if your seller gets an offer to do an installment land contract, do I have to present that offer to my seller? I see head shaking yes. Why? Because we present which offers to our sellers? All of them. And an offer to do an installment land contract is an offer. So we have to present that. There's some state regulations with installment land contract. You don't need to know the number. I just have it there for reference. But some of the state regulations gives us some instructions about days. So with the installment land contract, the attorney's going to record it. The seller has 5 business days of execution of the contract to record it. So the attorney will help us out with that. The reason I need this thing on record, the reason they need this thing on record, this prevents, remember, the seller still has legal title until that last payment's made. So by putting this installment land contract on record, this prevents the shady seller from selling it out from underneath the buyer. It's their title, it's still their property. This keeps them honest. The other days to be aware of, in the event that the buyer defaults, if they miss a payment and they default, the seller must give them up to 30 days to cure the default. If after 30 days, they can't come up with the default, they can't come up with the money, then the seller can evict the buyer. They can get them out. The seller still has the title. They have the property. Once they get that buyer out, they could release it, recontract it, right? It's theirs to do what they want. Seller doesn't have to give any of that money back that they've collected. They just have to give the buyer 30 days. After 30 days, now they can call their attorney and start the legal proceedings, terminate this thing. And again, if the buyer's not willing to go on their own, we have a squatter. And to deal with a squatter, the only legal remedy is to go to your magistrate for a summary ejectment. Have a court order to have them taken out. The sheriff will come. There's almost always pluses and minuses to everything. So advantages and disadvantages for the buyer. One advantage to the buyer, this could be an alternative means of financing. Maybe for whatever reason, the buyer's having a hard time getting loan approval. Maybe it's, circumstances out of their control sometimes, and they're having a hard time getting loan approval. So if you have a seller willing to work with a buyer, this could be a huge advantage to that buyer. They also have the advantage of lower down payments. Again, they're paying the purchase price, just not one lump sum. They're doing installments. They're kind of making payments on it. They're kind of putting it on layaway, aren't they? And they're making payments on it until they get that thing paid off, and then they get it out of layaway and get the property, get the title. Because they are living there, maybe even profiting from the land, probably paying taxes, they could have tax advantages. Have them talk to their accountant. Disadvantages for the buyer, the penalties are harsh if they default. Again, if the buyer misses a payment, the only thing they have going for them is the seller has to give them 30 days. If after that 30 days, they can't cure the default, they're out. And any installment money that they had previously paid, it's non-refundable. The seller is going to keep that. Another disadvantage is the buyer needs to be aware when they're ready to make that last payment before that deed changes hands, the buyer's going to want to get an attorney to search that title again and make sure that the shady seller didn't put anything on the title before that deed changes hands. So there could be additional legal fees. If the title's not clear, the party's got to get that cleared up before the seller can convey the title. Pluses and minuses for the seller. Again, they still own the property. The property is still in their title to their name. So they too may be able to get some tax advantages. Just have everybody talk to their accountant. I have no idea what those tax advantages could be, but I do know it'd be worth mentioning they talk to their accountant, make sure they take advantage of everything they can. The big advantage to the seller is that they keep the deed. They keep that legal title. So again, in the buyer default, at least they have that going for them. And for the seller, this might be a hard to sell property. So it might be that we find the right buyer for this property. You know, they can't get financing. The seller is having a hard time selling anyway. So the two might be able to come together and help each other out. The big disadvantage to the buyer, I'm sorry, to the seller, if the seller needs money now, then they probably won't be able to do an installment land contract. If they're doing an installment land contract, they're okay with those payments and not the lump sum. So they're going to have a lower down payment. They're going to be paid that amount in smaller payments. And if that buyer defaults and those 30 days are over, and again, if they don't go on their own, we're going to have to do the summary ejectment to get them out. And that's going to cost the seller some money to have them removed from the judge. Questions on an installment land contract? Another alternative method to convey is our option to purchase. The option to purchase, we mentioned last week. In real estate, the option to purchases are one example of a unilateral contract. So remember we said in contract world, in contract speak, lateral means side. So in a unilateral contract, how many sides have to perform? Yep, just one, just one. Most of everything we do is a bilateral contract where both sides have to perform. So let's understand what's going on here. And an option to purchase, the buyer has not agreed to buy. And an option to purchase, the buyer is asked for the option to decide if they want to buy. At the end of the option period, the buyer either contracts and we buy, or they terminate and we don't. They have a decision to make at the end of this option period. The only promise made during an option to purchase, the optionor or the owner agrees not to sell their property to anybody else during this option period. So they're basically agreeing not to sell their house to anybody until the end of the option period, where the potential buyer either decides to buy or they don't. Another thing that makes this situation so unique, we don't just have one form of consideration. And an option to purchase, we have two. I know the question is, what in the world would make a seller agree to not sell their home for a week, a month, a year, however long that option period is? And I think we can all agree, money talks, doesn't it? The option fee is usually pretty healthy. You give me $10,000 and want a year option, yeah, I'm going to give it to you. That option fee is the seller's, and that is required consideration in addition to the purchase price. When we enter into the option, we're going to already go ahead and negotiate those terms. So when we enter into the option, we're going to know if the optionee decides to buy, these are the terms that they're going to buy it at. So we know this going into it. We know the purchase price, all the terms. So we have two forms of consideration: the purchase price and the option fee. If the buyer decides to buy, that option fee will be credited. If they don't, the seller gets to keep it. That's what they paid for. Understanding that the optionee, the potential buyer, they have no legal interest in the property. They don't have ownership interest. They don't have possession. They can't live there. They don't own it. They have no right to be there except to inspect it and investigate it and decide if they want to buy or not. So if at the end of the option period, the optionee decides to buy, we already know the terms. We've already spelled out that contract. We've already said, if I buy, these are the terms. I think a couple common scenarios of when we might see these. Let's say, in the last couple of years in this crazy, swift moving market, homes are going on a contract within hours, right? Well, what if you had a buyer coming in the weekend, next weekend, and you're Wednesday or Thursday and you're watching these homes fly off the shelf? You know, maybe if money talks, we can enter into an option with one of these sellers. So when they come in this weekend, it's kind of locked down for that weekend until your buyer can come look for it. I'm telling you, you'd have to offer a lot of money in order for the seller not to be able to consider any other offers until they come see it. But I also know anything's negotiable, and I know money talks. So if you're offering enough option fee, a seller very well may consider that until your guys can get in this weekend and take a look at it and decide if they want to buy it or not. I think a more reasonable example of when we might use an option to purchase. Let's say you work for, or you were hired by like big corporate USA, and they want to open a warehouse. And so you go out and you find 2 or 3 warehouses that could fit their needs. We could enter into an option with those 2 or 3 warehouse owners until big corporate USA can come out and look at them and decide which one is going to best fit their need. So if we have 3 options in that scenario, at the end of the option period, we're going to buy one and not agree to buy the other. Again, the optionee is not locked down to anything until the end of that option period, if they make the decision to buy. So what makes it a unilateral contract? The optionor is the owner. They cannot sell it to anybody during that time. Also, the optionor cannot withdraw their offer to sell. Remember, all the terms have already been agreed upon when we enter into the option. The optionee can always come back and ask to renegotiate, right? We can ask for repairs. We can ask for lower the purchase price. The optionor is under no obligation to engage in those negotiations. They don't have to, but they cannot withdraw their offer to sell. So if we do come back and ask to reduce the purchase price, they can't, nope, not going to sell it to you. Once they're in, they're in. As we can imagine, my standard offer to purchase and contract, yeah, no, definitely doesn't cover that unilateral piece of the contract. So we have an attorney involved to draft up our option to purchase. And the option to purchase falls under both statute of frauds and the Connor Act. Statute of frauds says it has to be in writing and signed to be enforceable. Connor says it's got to be recorded to be enforceable. Again, we're preventing the shady seller from selling it out from underneath the buyer while they're still in their option period. So we want to make sure with an option that we're calling our attorney. We've got attorneys involved so they can help us make sure we're in compliance with the statute of frauds and the Connor Act. Questions on the option to purchase? The last alternative land method that we're going to talk about are preemptive rights. I got a couple different types of preemptive rights, but before we look at specifics, I think it helps to back up and kind of look at the big picture of what a preemptive right is. So all we're saying with a preemptive right is that one person has a contractual obligation to have the first right to purchase. Maybe you want to buy, but I don't want to sell right now. So we could enter into a preemptive right that says, if and when I do decide to sell, I must come to you first. We have this contractual agreement. Same scenario. Maybe I want to sell, but you don't want to buy right now. So we enter into one of these preemptive rights, and all we're doing is contractually obligating each other to come to each other first. So a couple different types of preemptive rights. The first one is the right of first refusal. In this case, the owner gives the contracting party to match a bona fide offer. In other words, what's happening is maybe the seller doesn't want to sell right now. But what this is saying is that the contracting party enters into this right of first refusal. And if the seller ever does get a legitimate offer in their hand, they must come to you first. You have that first right of refusal or right of first refusal. So if the owner decides to sell in the future, I got an offer. You have the right to match it or beat it. If not, I'm going to sell to this person. But before I can sell to this person, I got to run it by you first. That's our contractual obligation to each other. The other one then is the right of first opportunity to purchase. The difference is we don't have a bona fide offer. Maybe the seller didn't want to sell before, but now they do. Now that they've decided to sell, I'm contractually obligated to come to you first. Preemptive rights in general, I think common examples of when we may see preemptive rights, a tenant that's been living there for how many years? You know, right now the landlord doesn't want to sell because let's face it, rent money helps pay my bills, right? So right now the landlord doesn't want to sell. But what if the landlord does decide to sell? If the tenant's happy there, if they like the house, they may enter into a preemptive right that says to the landlord, when you do decide to sell, you're contractually obligated to come to me first. Maybe another good reason to enter into a preemptive right. Maybe you live next door to the vacant corner lot. And quite frankly, you have no interest in buying that vacant corner lot next door, but you don't want Dollar General to buy it either. So we enter into a preemptive right. If Dollar General shows up and offers, or anybody shows up and offers to buy that vacant corner lot next door to you, they're contractually obligated to come to you first. Would you want to buy that lot all of a sudden if you knew Dollar General was sniffing around? Yeah, those things are everywhere, aren't they? They're amazing how they pop up. Questions on preemptive rights or any of our alternative conveyance methods? As with an installment land contract, an offer to do an option to purchase or an offer to do a preemptive right is an offer that we have to present to our seller. Attorneys are involved with any of these though, even the preemptive rights. Has anybody had a chance yet? My triad people had a chance yet or the opportunity to show homes in Old Salem? Did y'all know people live in Old Salem? First off, people live there, right? The outside looks like Old Salem, but I'm telling you, when you walk in the front door, it's like 2023, you know? So when you get the opportunity to show a home in Old Salem and you go in MLS, one thing I've always seen about properties listed in MLS and the agent remarks is that Old Salem Inc. has the first right. I think they have this one, right of first refusal. So when you're writing that offer, if your buyer likes this and you're writing this offer, we need to take that consideration because we may need some more due diligence time, for example. You know, I don't know when the next time Old Salem Inc. is going to meet, but if they have that right of first refusal, you know, we just may want to reach out to somebody when we're writing that offer. But I've always seen that in the agent only remarks. Old Salem Inc. has the right of first refusal. My buyers didn't want to buy the house at Old Salem, so I didn't have to present an offer. But it was fun to go in and look on these houses. Very nice houses. Outside, they look like the 1800s, you know, colonial days. Inside, different. Check them out someday. It's fun. Questions, comments? Okay. Let's take a break. Come back. We're going to look at some more forms. Welcome back. All right. Let's knock out a few more of these forms. Let's see. Let me start down here now. Backup contract addendum. We're going to use this form if an offer is being made on a property that is already under contract. So let's back up for a second. You're the listing agent. You got your seller on the contract, sign contract, execute, it's a done deal. Now that you're under contract, you get an offer from another buyer. Do I have to present that offer to my seller? Yep. Because what offers do we present? All of them, even if we're under contract. So hopefully that other offer comes in with a backup contract addendum. So we're adding this to and making part of the offer to purchase a contract. The parties are going to agree to the terms of the contract on 2T like they always do. So the parties are going to agree on the purchase price, due diligence, earnest money, dates, all that good stuff. And by attaching this backup contract addendum, what's happening now is this second buyer, referred to as the backup buyer, upon acceptance, is placed in a backup position. So now we have two contracts, two people. You have the primary buyer with the primary contract, and then you have the backup buyer with the backup contract. And the role of the backup buyer, and this is funny to think about it this way, but the role of the backup buyer is for them to stand there, fingers crossed, and hope and pray that the primary terminates. Because if the primary terminates, the backup is going to move into a primary position. If the primary closes, the backup's not out anything. The backup doesn't owe due diligence until and if they become the primary. So if they never become the primary, they don't owe that due diligence. Now they will put some earnest money in an escrow account, again, just showing their good faith. But if the backup never becomes a primary, they'll get their earnest money back. If the backup terminates, they'll get their earnest money back. Same thing applies. The only time this buyer is going to lose their earnest money deposit is if they move to the primary and they terminate after due diligence. So the backup buyer's just hanging out in the wings, hoping on this primary contract to terminate. The backup buyer has to be notified. They have to be notified that they have been placed in that primary position. We'll see that in just a second. Again, in the event the primary closes and this backup becomes null and void, and the earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer. This is where it kind of addresses our earnest money and due diligence. They'll put earnest money in an escrow account, but they're not going to owe due diligence. They have seller delivers notice to buyer of primary status, in which case the backup buyer that's now the primary has 2 days to deliver the due diligence fee. So again, they don't owe that money until and if they become the primary. Another thing about the backup contract addendum to address are dates, due diligence date and settlement date. We can't put a date in because I don't know if the primary is going to terminate. And if they do, I don't know what date. So I can't say due diligence through this date, settlement on this date. But instead what we can do, due diligence shall extend through 5 p.m. on the last day of a numbered day period following seller's delivery to buyer of notice of primary status. So do you want 25 days of due diligence? Do you want 30 days? So instead of putting a date in there, we're going to put a number of date. Same thing with the settlement date. Contract shall be on a date that is the number of days following the seller's delivery to the buyer to notice the buyer of the primary status. So in other words, what we're saying to you guys is this backup buyer is not contractually obligated to do anything until and if they become the primary. If they never become the primary, no big deal. Everybody goes on. Same thing with the due diligence and the settlement dates. These dates aren't going to apply. They don't mean anything until and if we receive that buyer notice that they are now on primary status. This blue note addresses how we put the dates in 2T. So it tells us instead of putting the dates in 2T, just actually put the verbiage. See attached backup contract addendum. So when we look at 2T and we see those dates, we're directed to the number of days following that notice. Buyer's right to terminate. They can terminate this backup contract without liability. All they have to do is give written notice of termination to the seller at any time prior to being notified that they are the primary status. And if they do terminate, the earnest money deposit shall be refunded to the buyer. So the buyer's not really risking it. The backup buyer's not really risking anything. They're just putting themselves in a position to be next if that primary terminates. Some sellers like the backup contract idea because they'll say if this primary terminates, they don't want to go through all those showings again and getting 30 some offers again, right? They don't want to go through that process again. So if they have a buyer making the backup, they know they don't have to do that. Other sellers will say, no, I don't want to do this because if we go back on the market, I'm going to want all offers again. I'm going to want the people to bring it so I can pick the best one. So bottom line, whether or not we accept a backup contract depends on the seller. Remember, we make the offer. The seller has three choices, don't they? They can accept the backup contract, reject it, or try to counter. Buyer signs on the left, seller signs on the right. And then the third page of this is notice to buyer that the backup contract is now in effect. So the seller has to provide written notice. The addendum itself helps provide that written notice. Only the seller signs it because what they're doing is notifying the buyer that the primary is terminated. And because the primary is terminated, the backup is moved into a primary position. Understand too, this form only allows us to have one backup buyer, one backup. So you can't have a backup to the backup and a backup to the backup to the backup, right? We can't line them down the street. One backup. If you have somebody that wants to be the backup to the backup, they need to talk to their attorney. This form just allows for one backup. Comments on this one? Are they required to communicate that there's a backup to the primary? That they are in negotiations? Are they required to communicate that there is backup to the primary? Backup to the primary. Are they telling the primary? Is that what you're asking me? They're telling the primary? I don't think they have to tell the primary. There's no requirement there. Again, that would be up to the sellers. If the primary starts wavering, they may want to let that primary know, whatever, I don't care about you because I got somebody waiting out, you know, or, you know, so no, there is no requirement to tell the primary there's a backup. Anybody done one of these yet? Not yet. Another one of these things that's always been around, but this crazy multiple offer world we're in, it's just become popular again. You know, remember that seller that got 30 offers? Can only accept one contract, right? So there's 29 rejections. One of those 29 rejected buyers may want to bring an offer with a backup contract in the hope to be put in that position. I think for the buyer, it comes down to how badly do they want the property. I almost did one of these once. I was the listing agent, that little cute little multiple offer house I had in Greensboro. After we accepted the one and rejected the others, the buyer presented a new offer with the backup contract addendum. But the terms in the offer they presented with the backup were less than what they originally offered when we were in the multiple offer situation, which I thought was really weird. Like we already knew what they were willing to offer because that's what they offered once. And once they got the opportunity to make a different offer, they weren't as good. So my guys countered with their original terms. My guys countered and they were like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. All right. So they tried, we tried, it didn't work out. As it turns out, we didn't meet them because my primary buyer, that buyer went through with closing. But it was a totally separate negotiations because we'd already rejected their first offer. So then they had to bring us a new offer with the backup contract addendum attached. Does that make sense? It's a new ball game now. FHA, VA, financing addendum. We're going to use this form when our buyers are getting an FHA or a VA loan. So you can see here, we're going to check which box is applicable. Either they're getting an FH or VA loan. FH is first or FHA is first. And we're going to put an amount in. We have a place to put an amount in. And basically what this is saying is if the property doesn't appraise for X amount is what we're filling in there. If the property doesn't appraise, then the buyer has the option to terminate. And if they terminate because the property doesn't appraise, they will get their earnest money back, even if we are after due diligence. So this form protects the buyer's earnest money deposit if they choose not to purchase because it doesn't appraise. Very similar verbiage with VA, only we're not putting an amount in. The appraisal in this point is the purchase price, which generally speaking is what I see in here as well, the purchase price. But that's covered down here in the VA. And then the other piece of the VA notice is letting the seller know that the DVA, the Department of Veteran Affairs, may or may not require certain inspections, such as well water, septic sewer, wood destroying insects to be performed. Also letting the seller know that some inspections may or may not be required to be at whose expense? At the seller's expense. Listing agents, is this important to go over your seller when you get a VA offer? Letting them know that they may be on the hook for certain inspections. If inspections are required to be performed at the seller's expense, seller agrees to pay the cost of the inspections. That paragraph 8I that is referencing here, that's the seller paid expenses where we would need to put the amount of those inspections in, even if they don't agree to any other closing costs. So preparing the sellers, letting them know, going over this form with them. There are not many forms that you and I get to sign, but this is one of them. So we have buyer signs on the left, seller signs on the right, and then the agents are signing as well. It was explained to me once that the reason the agents are signing, the lender wants to make sure that the buyer and the seller aren't in cahoots to get a better deal, to get a better rate or a better deal from the lender. So you and I are signing this, acknowledging to the best of our knowledge that the two aren't working together to try to get that better deal. They're not in cahoots. I did a FHA, I was a listing agent, so our buyers are getting an FHA, and the lender had a whole form for me to sign about, I don't know, I have no knowledge of them knowing each other. I have no knowledge of them working together. I mean, I had to sign acknowledging that I wasn't aware, which I wasn't. Questions on FHA, VA financing addendum? I had a question come up once and posed, well, it's a pretty good question. I went to my lender buddy about it, but they said, you know, FHA VA financing is a national program. It's not state, but this addendum is a state form. It's a North Carolina Association of Realtor form. So my question was, do we have to use it? right? If it's a state form for a national thing. So I went to my lender buddy and he said, you know, if your buyer's getting FHA or VA and you don't include this form, the lender has a form very similar to it that they'll require the buyer and the seller to sign. So I tried, but I tried to get us out of using a form, but it didn't work out for me. So, yep, any FHA, VA, no matter if it's on a state form, lender form, whatever, there's going to have that kind of verbiage in there. Up next, we have two. We're going to kind of talk about parallel, similar situations, just a little different. We have a buyer possession before closing. We have a seller possession after closing. So the big picture of both of these scenarios, somebody's living there that doesn't own the property. One party's acting as the landlord, the other party's acting as the tenant. In either case, seller possession after closing or buyer possession before, both parties need to talk to their insurance carriers before they sign this thing. Make sure that they can afford these policies, make sure the insurance carriers offers these policies. So let's start with buyer possession before. This is a big red warning to buyers and sellers. We're told this form may not be used for long-term occupancy. This form does not address important issues that are typically addressed in a lease, such as a security deposit. If we're looking at long-term occupancy, we should be given, consider using the residential rental agreement or another residential lease. And then both parties are advised to confirm with an insurance professional the terms of the coverage under their property. So in this case, a buyer possession before closing, the buyer's moving in before the deed changes hands. And if it's not long-term, then it's short-term. They don't give us much room for interpretation there, do they? There is no amount of time. Some of us old school people, it actually used to say 14 days. So some of us old school people may still have that stuck in our heads. But bottom line, I think short-term, long-term comes down to what the parties. I wouldn't do anything more than 2 weeks for these. If you're doing more than 2 weeks, then we need a lease because this just covers the very, very basics. Term of possession. Buyer can take possession of the property at 8 a.m. on this date. This agreement shall terminate either the earlier of closing or the earlier of termination of the contract. So if we go to closing, possession happens, the buyer becomes the owner. The big question with this one, though, is what if the buyer terminates? So if the buyer terminates, that's going to terminate this buyer possession before closing. And if the parties don't agree otherwise, the buyer's got to get out. That's a time being of the essence. Seller shall not access the property during this term, except with permission or in case of emergency. Buyer's waiver and acceptance of property possession. If the buyer takes possession while we're still in due diligence, that's pretty much going to waive the rest of their due diligence rights. So if we do a buyer possession before closing and we're still in due diligence, in a sense, we just ended due diligence. It is terminated now. Buyer has an obligation to maintain the property. They can't alter, modify, or damage it without permission of the seller, without written consent of the seller. Remember, let your buyer know it's not their property yet. So they're living there before closing because the seller allowed them to. So they can't make any changes on the seller's property. We have to negotiate and agree on rent. Again, one party's acting as the tenant, somebody else is acting as the landlord. So we're going to agree in rent and a lump sum, usually paid outside of settlement, maybe, cashier's check or something. And then termination, if the contract is terminated, the buyer shall immediately vacate the property and return all means of access. If the buyer doesn't immediately terminate, the buyer shall be continued to the bound terms of this agreement. And in addition, they're going to pay the seller a holdover fee of X amount per day that they remain. If I were the listing agent, that would be a hefty holdover fee. So in the event the buyer terminates and they don't get out, they owe X amount holdover fee. Buyer is responsible for utilities, so sewer, water, gas, etc. Buyer's living there, so they're responsible for lawn maintenance and trash. This addresses insurance on both parties. The buyer in this case needs renter's insurance. The seller needs homeowner's insurance. It can't be sublet. The seller still owns, so they're on the hook for association dues. Pets are allowed or not. If we have to proceed, if the seller has to proceed with eviction, their only eviction remedy is summary ejectment. So if that buyer's holding over, if we've got a squatter buyer that won't leave, they terminated and they won't leave, the only thing the seller can do is summary ejectment. Buyer signs on the left, seller signs on the right. This is our buyer possession before closing. Similar to that, but different, is the seller possession after closing. So now the deed has changed hands, but the seller's remaining in the property for a short-term occupancy. This form is only used for short-term. Again, that may be an agreement up to the parties. I would think no more than a week or two. Now we need to do an actual lease. In this case, again, we go to closing, that deed changes hands, but the seller's going to remain. It's kind of funny to think about this, but once we go to closing, the seller is now renting the home that they literally just owned this morning. Isn't that funny? So they're staying and they're paying rent. They're now the tenants of the homes that they owned this morning. So term of the possession, seller can remain in possession of the property for however many days after closing. Time being of the essence. Again, the buyer can't access the property without permission or in case of emergency. Seller acknowledges that all appliances are good and will work in like order, except for the following. So if there's something not working, maybe the dishwasher or whatever isn't working, then this is where the seller needs to spell that out. Seller's responsible for maintenance and repair of all these appliances. Seller's got to maintain the property in its same condition. They can make no changes without written permission of the buyer. Although now the buyer isn't the buyer anymore, are they? The buyer is the new owner. So the seller needs to understand when that deed changes hands, they can't make changes without the owner's permission. We're going to talk about rent, how much, non-refundable lump sum, termination of possession. Seller shall vacate the property no later than the end of the term. If they've not vacated, seller shall continue to be bound to the terms. And they're going to pay the buyer a holdover fee of X amount. Again, if I were a buyer's agent, I would have a hefty amount here for that holdover fee. Seller's going to pay utilities, lawn maintenance, trash. Seller's now going to have renter's insurance. Buyer's going to have homeowner's insurance. And the buyer's going to be on the hook for the owner association dues, because they are now considered the owner under the eyes of the homeowners association. If the seller becomes a squatter and they won't leave, the buyer's only eviction remedy is summary ejectment. Buyer signs on the left, seller signs on the right. Again, anything more than a week or two, or whatever the parties agree, we have a residential rental contract that we can use through NCAR, or we have the attorney draft something up. Has anybody done either one of these yet?
Would this be something that you would do in the situation where you have contingency? Somebody wants to move the settlement date and they can't get out until like the day or two after that because of maybe their new house isn't done being built or something like that. Or would they would use this, or would they would just simply have the attorney draw something up for the extra day?
Yeah, either way. So this could cover that extra day because it's, day would be short term for sure. If the parties aren't comfortable with this, because it is very, very, very basic. So if the parties aren't comfortable with this, they may opt to pay to have the attorney draft something up or let us use the residential rental contract. I will say this, you guys, I've done both. I've done a seller possession after, I've done a buyer possession before. And talking to other agents on the streets, both of mine were very smooth. They both went really well. And in talking to agents, evidently I was really lucky because sometimes these things can get ugly fast. So if your buyers and sellers are considering this, obviously we want both parties to talk to their insurance. If they have further questions about the legalities, we need to get them to an attorney before they act on this. Kelly, the scenario you just gave was pretty much the reason for my seller possession after closing. My buyers were buying, the sellers were building new construction. And as so happens in new construction, it got delayed. And I think they needed like 4 or 5 days, nothing crazy, but they just needed a little extra time. And the sellers had 3 kids, all under the age of 5. And they said, if we only have to move these kids once, it'll be better. And it really worked out because my buyers weren't moving here for like, another week or month and a half anyway. So it was just going to be a vacant home. It's not like they showed up to closing with the moving truck or anything, The sellers left the home when they did leave because my guys were out of town. So I met the agent to, get all the keys, all the access to the property, and then met up with my buyers later. But when the agent and I met at the house, that house was in immaculate condition. I mean, it looked really good for the showings, but they left it in immaculate. They left a daggum gift basket on the kitchen counter for my buyers, thanking them for letting them do this. I mean, both parties were very appreciative. And my buyers, my little young first-time home buyers were so cute. They're like, really? I'm going to buy a house and then I'm going to get rent? I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much the way it's going to work out. So they were thrilled. Same thing with my buyer possession before close, and the guys moved in and they were just they took such good care of the property. Again, I think I'm the lucky one in talking to other agents. So of course, I'm not saying don't do it. It's not up to us. It's up to the discretion of the buyers or sellers, but just make sure we have them talk to the appropriate parties so they know what they're getting themselves into. In case it does go bad, everybody's prepared. Questions on either of these? These kind of, when we're working with buyers and sellers and forms, particularly, our forms are designed to address for sale or for lease. We don't have many situations where you have a lease and sale and the same transaction. So like, for example, if we want to do a lease, we have 2T. Well, one thing we do not have available to us is like a lease addendum, because that would be combining the for sale of 2T and the for lease of the addendums. That makes sense? So typically speaking, those two are not combined. What makes these unique is that they do allow for this short-term possession, either before closing or after closing. But we don't have any kind of addendum to add a lease agreement to 2T. So if they decide not to sell, but they want to lease it, then we need to enter into that residential rental lease contract. Lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum. Anything built prior to 1978, this form's going to be included. This is another dual form. This form serves as a seller disclosure and buyer acknowledgement. So let's understand first off, this form does not say your house was built prior to 1978, it's got lead. What this form does say is because your property was built prior to 1978, it may contain lead. When it comes to disclosing lead-based paint or lead in the home, this is one place that caveat emptor doesn't apply. This is the one thing that the seller has to disclose. This is the federal law. So this overrides our state caveat emptor. It's recommended, we'll look at the buyer has the right to have the property tested or inspected at the buyer's expense. It's recommended that we help the buyer get the EPA pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. You can get it through your firm. If your firm doesn't have it, go to EPA, Google Environmental Protection Agency, and you can look it up and find the pamphlet there on their website. The pamphlet just kind of breaks down the possible dangers, the risks of lead in the home. We'll remember that lead poisoning affects children and women with child. So it's those little developing organs and bodies that are affected by lead poisoning. So especially if kids are involved. By the way, before I forget, there's also a version of this form for rental situations as well. So we have the opportunity to tell tenants, particularly those with children, that they have the option to get this booklet and learn more about the possible dangers. So this addresses those dangers, young children, what could happen if they do get lead poisoning. Then the seller's disclosure. And again, they must disclose if they know, but they can't disclose what they don't know. So if the sellers had the home professionally painted, if they have hired contractors, those that are paid to do a service, those contractors should have had it tested if it was built prior to 1978. If the sellers that do it yourselfer and they're going to paint themselves, they may not know that they should have it tested. They just got to Lowe's, buy some paint, and they're good to go. So they can only disclose what they know. First thing they're going to disclose is if they know of presence of lead-based paint in the home. They're told to check one. Either they know of the presence or they have no knowledge. And the second thing they're going to disclose if those records and reports are available. So either the seller has provided the buyer with all records and reports pertaining to the lead-based paint, or they have no records or reports to provide. With this being a seller disclosure, a lot of times we'll see this loaded in MLS attachments with our RPODs and our MOG, if it's applicable, if it's built prior to 1978. So listing agents, we generally have the seller fill this out first. And then when the buyer's making their offer, they'll sign off on the acknowledgements. Buyer acknowledges receipt of the seller statement above and copies of records and reports, if any. Buyer's going to acknowledge the receipt of that Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home pamphlet. So if you're not going to give this to your buyer, don't tell them to initial that. We're only going to initial it if we give it to them. And then the buyer's either going to accept the opportunity to conduct their risk assessment test during their due diligence period, or they're going to waive that opportunity. So they're going to accept it or waive it. I wish they would have put that on the same page for us, but it's carryover to page 2. This is another form, the other form that you and I get to sign. So first off, we're going to have an agent acknowledge that they've informed the seller. Because this is the one informing the seller, I'd venture out to say that this is the listing agent acknowledging that they've informed the seller about their rights under lead-based paint, this U.S. general statute, their responsibility to ensure compliance. Buyer signs on the left, seller signs on the right, and then both agents sign as well. This one in the FHA-VA financing addendum, that's all we get to sign that I know of. There might be others, but we don't get to sign much. Where are my, I know you're out there. Where are my HGTV fans? Come on. Yeah, there you are. I know you're out there. All right. So my HGTV fans, y'all know your friends, Chip and Joanna? They got themselves in trouble a couple years ago for violating, somehow mishandling the federal lead-based paint hazard addendum laws. I can't tell you specifics. I don't know what they did, but I do remember them being in the news. So even our reality stars have to follow the rules and the laws, and that does include dealing with properties built prior to 1978. Questions on that? The additional provisions addendum. Of all of the addenda, I think the additional provisions addendum is the most commonly used. So these are like popular provisions, commonly used provisions, but they're just not popular enough to make it into standard form 2T yet. If they gain in popularity, maybe one day we'll see them there, but for right now, they're still going to hang out in this additional provisions addendum. So the property, the buyer, and the seller. The blue note instructs us on how to complete this form. So we're told any provisions that are applicable, mark with an X. Those that are not applicable, mark NA, not applicable. And you can see you have a space here on the side of each to talk about either say X or NA. So a couple of different things that the additional provisions addenda addresses. First off, expiration of offer. If your offeror wants to put an expiration date on their offer, they can use this form to do that. Some buyers in any market, I've always done this. You know, sometimes you make an offer, you think you're going to make an offer, and the listing agent may say, well, we got 3 showings today, and I got 5 tomorrow, and we got 2 more on Monday. So we're going to let all those showings happen, and then we'll respond to your offer. You may have a buyer say, no, I want them to respond to my offer now. If they want to wait, they can wait, but I'm going to put an expiration date on my offer. It says it's good until 5 o'clock tomorrow. Either they take it or they don't, right? So depending on the high pressure stakes of the market, they may choose to put an expiration of offer on. But again, they're going to say this offer expires unless unconditional acceptance is delivered to the buyer on or before this date and time being of the essence, or until withdrawn by the buyer, whichever occurs first. Remember, the offeror is free to revoke their offer at any time prior to acceptance, even if they put an expiration date on it. So that's reminding us of that. If the property may possibly need an on-site septic system, so septic system installation or modification, we use provision number 2 here. As part of the buyer's due diligence, buyer intends to obtain an improvement permit or a written evaluation from the county for an in-ground septic system for however many bedroom of homes. Except for the cost of clearing the property, all costs and expenses obtaining a permit or written evaluation shall be borne on the buyer unless agreed otherwise. Seller is going to be responsible for clearing that portion of the property that the county is going to perform its tests and inspections, and the seller needs to clear that portion of the property no later than this date. Listing agents, if they have an on-site septic system and the buyer wants to get it inspected, we need to prepare our sellers, because the only way I know for them to inspect a septic system is to show up with the backhoe and start digging. So prepare your sellers. They're going to be digging down into the tank to inspect it. Seller is going to make sure that that portion of the land is cleared. If it's bare land and there is not a septic system installed yet, Obviously, the buyer's gonna wanna do that as part of their due diligence. What they're gonna have done is referred to as a perk test to make sure that the property can, we wanna make sure that the ground can support an on-site septic system. So they're gonna look at things like absorption, right? Can the ground absorb? We want location is gonna be noted. So in other words, you want the septic system below the structure. You don't want the structure below the septic system because it runs down. What else? Number of bedrooms, that would tell us the tank as well. So again, we're either looking at installing a septic system and having the land perk, or modifying it and getting that written evaluation from the county health department. If it's a rental income or investment property, this property is going to be conveyed subject to an existing lease and or rights of tenants. Seller shall deliver to buyer on or before this date true copies of existing leases, rental agreements, tenant notices, written statements, statements of tenants' deposits, on-cure defaults, claims, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So part of the buyer's due diligence, if you're buying a property and acquiring a tenant, acquiring a lease, part of your due diligence should be to look at the terms of the lease, look at the records, look at the condition of that relationship, getting your hands on all those documents. The other thing this addresses is security deposits. So any security deposit held in connection with this lease shall be transferred to the buyer at settlement and otherwise in accordance with the North Carolina Tenant Security Deposit Act. Seller will or will not transfer the buyer any pet deposit fee at settlement. If we are selling a property with a lease in place and there's a tenant security deposit act or tenant security deposit, pretty much the parties can choose to do one of two things. Either we can have the attorney transfer it from the seller landlord's escrow account to the buyer landlord's escrow account. Once that deed changes hands, they can set up an escrow account. Or the seller can return it to the tenant, and then after closing, let the new landlord try to collect it from the tenant. I think as a new landlord, did that just give us a little bit of a headache? Because the tenant would need to understand that they're going to owe that money. Don't go out and spend it, because as soon as that deed changes hands, you're going to have to pay the new landlord. So I think the cleanest way to do it is just let the attorney transfer that at settlement. There is also a provision for any agreed upon repairs and or improvements. So let's talk about this for a second. We're adding this to our offer to purchase and contract. So when we make the offer, we have the additional provisions addendum, if applicable, attached to the offer. So if we're asking it for any repairs or improvements right now, basically what your buyer's saying is, I'm not going to buy this house if this isn't fixed, or if this isn't improved, or if this isn't repaired. So your seller knows when they receive the offer, your seller knows the repairs that the buyer expects. And if the seller accepts this offer, then they're contractually obligated to do those repairs. If that happens, this doesn't negate the buyer being able to conduct due diligence, inspections, and investigations during due diligence. They can ask for repairs just like they always do. So there's a difference in whether we're asking for them up front when we're presenting the offer, or if we're asking for them once we're under contract after our inspections and investigations. Does this make sense? Sometimes we can walk in the home and see things are broke. And again, if your buyer says any kind of verbiage like, I'm not buying if this isn't fixed, that's a cue for us to use this form. We're asking for repairs when we're presenting the offer versus asking for repairs at the end of our due diligence. Does that make sense? I know one example, a couple examples. One I had one time, there was a sliding glass door and it looked like maybe a lawnmower threw a rock at it. There was the teeniest hole on that sliding glass door and it was starting to spider. I don't know about you guys, but I don't need a home inspector to come in here and tell me that that door needs to be fixed. Can you guys look at that and see that that's a repair that needs to be made? So if that's something important to your buyer, if they wanted that fixed, we can ask for it when we're presenting the offer. I used this once. My buyers, young married couple, they didn't have kids. I don't think kids were in their near future. We walked out back in the backyard and there was a nice playground set. I mean, like nice playground set. Like all three of us wanted to go play. You know, it just looked like a whole lot of fun. And my buyer says, well, that looks great and all, but we don't have kids. That's wasted space for us. That's where we want to put our garden. Can we ask the sellers to take it down? My answer was, sure, we put it in here. Sellers agreed and they were contractually obligated. Let's see, what about like carpet cleaning? Would that fall under here? Absolutely. So if you walk into a home and you know there's been a pet there, right? You walk in the front door and you know, you could ask for something like that to be taken care of. And if they agree to it, remember, we present this with the offer. So what are the seller's three choices? They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. They don't have to agree to do this. But if this is something that's important to your buyer, we've not been seeing this much. We've not been seeing many repairs lately, but that's something else that's going to come back and we may be asked to do stuff up front. I had a post licensing student once and he was down around in the Fayetteville area. I don't know exactly where, but Fayetteville somewhere. And apparently down there, a common practice when sellers go under contract, they just stop mowing their yard. They just stop. So by the time you get to closing, it's like 6 weeks worth of grass growth, you know, whatever. So this guy, this clever guy, started putting this in all of his offers. Seller to maintain to maintain the lawn, so that way the buyers weren't moving into a jungle. You know, we can be a little creative with this. Just remember, if it's a multiple offer situation and you got one buyer asking for this, this, and this, and you got another buyer not asking for anything, which one looks better through the eyes of the seller? So a lot of it may depend on the market. The other thing I have to say about this, remember, this adds to and becomes part of the offer to purchase and contract, which means when we send this to the lender, this is going to be included. So we may want to consider putting a timeline on when we need these repairs done, because the appraiser is also going to see this. And if the appraiser goes out and these aren't done, they may not be able to give their opinion of value until these repairs are made. So the lender will see this, the appraiser will see this. Just keep that in mind, because now it becomes part of the contract. Questions on that? Comments? I had an agent say once that she wished MLS came with a scratch and sniff feature, so you could smell some of those homes sometimes before you walked in the front door. You know? I like it. Couple other provisions here. If the property has a manufactured or mobile home, we're going to include that's going to convey. Then we're going to include the information about the mobile home. And then the new provision, the one we just got a year or so ago, I guess 2020 with the last revision. If there's an outdoor pool or spa and they've been winterized. So if we're looking at this property in February, the pool's probably been shut down for the winter, right? The outdoor hot tub has probably been shut down. If we're looking at it this time of year, if it's operable, it should be up and running. But the buyer may choose to conduct at buyer's expense any pool or spa inspections, any costs associated with putting the pool and spa in operable condition so that can be inspected, and any costs associated with any necessary re-winterizing it, what's been expected, shall be on the responsibility of, and then the parties have to decide who's going to pay for that. Buyer signs on the left, seller signs on the right. Additional provisions addendum. Questions on this one? Did you guys know how much we liked forms before you signed up for pre-licensing? We're known as the industry of forms. If you didn't know that now, you do now, right? I mean, you know, it's, we love our paperwork, don't we? Owners Association Disclosure Addendum. This one starts with a nice note to help us know when to use it. This is used when the RPOs is not required. So for example, if it's new construction or vacant lot and land. You'll remember, like the last page and a half of the RPOs is addressing owners association information. So if the RPOs isn't required, we still want to get that owners association information out to the buyer. And this is the form that we can use to do that. So this is going to look awfully similar to the last page and a half of the RPOs because that's what it's covering. So who's the HOA? The dues are X amount per month, per quarter, per year, whatever they are. Is there more than one HOA? The seller can represent to the buyer what the HOA dues cover. So nice little handy dandy checklist here about the things that are covered. Various information about the HOA, like they facing any kind of unsatisfied judgments, any fees charged with transferring the HOA. And then the seller authorizing the homeowners association to release any documents, covenants, bylaws, articles of incorporation, etc. Buyer signs on the left, seller signs on the right. So when we don't use the RPOs for new construction, we still want to disclose the homeowners association information. And before we do those, it's break time already. So it happens when you have fun with forms. Time flies, doesn't it? Woo, y'all should have seen the look I just got. All right, 10 minutes. Come back at 3:31. Welcome back. I'm watching some of these dark clouds. I'm so worried about my garden. I'm worried it's gonna like get mold or mildew or something on it. I don't know. Such a thing as too much rain. I think we're trying to grill out tonight because I just want to be outside for a minute. So I'm like, please, please don't let it rain. All right. Few more forms to talk about. Vacation rental addendum. Kelly, you're probably more apt to use this form than the rest of us here in Winston-Salem. So vacation rental addendum is when we're selling a property that's currently being used as a vacation rental property. So I say Kelly because I know that lucky duck is down at the Outer Banks. I think if you're down at the coast or near a body of water or up in the mountains or something, well, we're likely to use this. Winston-Salem's lovely, but let's face it, people are not vacationing here. So that's why we just don't see that too much here in our area. Again, it adds to 2T, offer to purchase and contract 2T. And the big thing that this form addresses, it lets the buyer know that under the North Carolina Vacation Rental Act, if a buyer buys a property that's currently being used as a vacation property, they have to honor the next 6 months of reservations. So when they buy, they have to honor what's already on the books for the next 6 months. If your buyer's buying this to use it as a vacation property, they may want to keep everything that they have on the books, right? Because that's money coming in. But where this may come into place, if your buyer's buying and they don't want to use it as a vacation rental, they want to use it as personal property, we need to let them know that they'll buy it and then they'll hang tight for 6 months and then they can do what they will with it. If you're ever going to deal with vacation property, you need to get some more education. You need to get some more experience. So I would start with the forms. There's a North Carolina Vacation Rental Act. And of course, you'll probably be affiliated with a firm that handles vacation property. So just make sure you're learning about it so you know how to proceed with your buyers. And then the last one is our short sale addendum. So let's talk first kind of the big picture of what we're looking at, and then we'll look at the addendum. If we list a property for sale that's a short sale potential, the fact that it's a short sale potential is a material fact that we have to disclose. So let's talk about why it's called a short sale potential. When we look at this form in just a minute, one thing we're going to see is that this form creates a contingency for the seller. So remember what a contingency says. If this doesn't happen, then I'm not legally obligated to complete the transaction. I'm off the hook. If A doesn't happen, then no B. So with the contingency that this form is creating is that the seller can't sell until they get lien holder approval, or more accurate, lien holders approval. If we're in a short sale potential, the seller is underwater. And what I mean by that is they owe more than what we can sell the property for. The lien holders aren't going to consider this until they have a bona fide buyer, a bona fide contract in their hand. So when we're listing it as a short sale potential. Buyer and seller negotiate the terms of the contract like they always do. If the buyer's going to buy, this is the purchase price, due diligence, earnest money, et cetera, et cetera. Attaching this form creates a contingency upon the lien holder's approval, and only upon the lien holder's approval is the seller under any obligation to perform. Through the eyes of the seller, a short sale is better than a foreclosure. Short sales don't stay on your credit history as long as a foreclosure. Foreclosure will follow you for like 7 years. A short sale only follows you for like 3. Through the eyes of the seller, there's not as many cost, time, involvement as a foreclosure. Bottom line, what are we going to do? The short sale or the foreclosure? That's going to be up to the lien holders. For the lien holders, they care about 2 things, time and money. So the lien holders are going to ask themselves, which one, foreclosure or short sale, will get me the most money and cost me the less time? So whether or not we can even do this, if you get that call to list a property as a potential short sale, the form actually tells the seller, call your attorney, call your accountant. We got them calling everybody to make sure that we're proceeding properly. So you have an offer come in, listing agent, you have an offer come in, you've advertised it in MLS as a short sale potential. You have an offer come in, and attached to the offer is the short sale addendum. If you were to possibly do a short sale, buyer or seller, I do recommend taking time to go through this form and explaining to them what's going on, because I think this form does a great job of helping them understand. So first off, we're going to define what a short sale is. And in order to have a short sale, we have to have all 3 pieces. So the first piece of a short sale is that the purchase price is insufficient to pay off the debt on the home. The seller's underwater. They owe more than what we can sell the property for. The second piece, the seller doesn't have sufficient liquid assets to pay the cost of the sale. So in addition to being underwater, they don't have those liquid assets. What do we mean by liquid assets?
Money that's not tied up to where they can actually pay it off.
That's right. Money that we can easily convert to cash. So in addition to being underwater, they can't drain their bank account and cash in their stocks. That's what we mean by the liquid assets. Real estate, for example, is not a liquid asset. We can't easily convert it to cash. The third piece of the short sale is that we have to have the lien holders agreement to release the lien and accept less than what they're owed. All of the lien holders have to agree to release the lien with receiving less than what they're owed. Again, the lien holders aren't even going to look at this until we send them a contract. Because before they even consider this, they want to know that they have a buyer waiting to buy. When we talk about a short sale, the term short has nothing to do with the amount of time that these things take. These things have a reputation of taking, Kelly's shaking her head. They say on average, we can expect 6 months for a short sale contract to close.
We went under contract March the 4th. We closed on September 30th.
You were the 6 months average. You were the 6 month. I've done 2. One of mine was 4 months. One was 11 and a half months. So I guess I'm kind of the average too. My 2 pretty much averaged out. I've heard of some of these going 2 years. The name of the game in a short sale is patience. You just got to be patient. Buyers and sellers say all the time, well, can't you just call somebody and have them put you in the front of the line? I think if you call somebody, they're going to do the opposite of that. They're going to take your file and they're going to put it under the stack, and you're going to go to the bottom of the pile. Be patient. Know that these things will work out when they're good and ready. This form addresses the risks. Buyer and seller understand and agree that, first off, no lien holder is required or obligated to approve the short sale. And in order to have the short sale approval, we have to have all of the lien holders agree. So let's just say you have 5 lien holders, 4 agree and 1 doesn't. We can't do the short sale. That's the contingency. All lien holders have to approve. Otherwise, the seller's not on the hook to sell. Lien holders, once they get the contract, they may require some terms to be amended in exchange for approval of the short sale. But also understand that buyer and seller are not obligated to agree to any of the lien holders' proposed terms. So remember what we said, Buyer and seller negotiating the terms of this offer like they always do. Once the lien holder gets it, they may look at it and say, no, we need to change something. At which case the buyers and the sellers are pretty much entering into round 2 of the negotiations. Nobody's on the hook. And if they say, we're not changing this, then we're not going to get lien holders approval. Seller may not be financially to make any repairs. Through the eyes of the lien holder, they may say, I'm not going to let you make a $5,000 repair on the electrical when you owe me money. When you're telling me you want me to release my liens and not be paid everything I'm owed. So in this case, it may not be up to the sellers. The lien holders may say, no, you're not doing any repairs. The cost of the due diligence and any due diligence fee are usually non-refundable to the buyer in the event the short sale is not approved. When I did both of my short sales, and this was a different market, we weren't in a seller's market yet when I did mine. So I might have had a different leverage then than we do now, than we did then. But when I did both of my short sales, I actually went in with 0 due diligence, and we went in heavy with the earnest money. Because as the buyer's agent, I was trying to protect my buyer. And when I saw that it's usually not refundable in the amount that the short sale is not approved, that was something that worked for us. Again, things may be a little bit different in this market now that the sellers are, driving that market in control. So that might be a market condition thing, but hey, it worked out for me. Lien holders approval may take several weeks, or months, to obtain. Neither the seller nor any agent representing the seller or buyer can guarantee the timeliness of the lien holder's review, approval, or rejection. And then big bold, neither the buyer, the seller, the closing attorney, nor the brokers in this transaction have any control over the lien holder's approval or any act, omission, or decision by any lien holders in the short sale process. So once again, the name of the game is patience. Everybody needs to know going into this, on average, they're looking at 6 months till we get that lien holders approved, that contract to closing process. They're called a short sale, again, not because the amount of time that it takes, but because the fact that the seller is short on funds to complete the transaction. Here's our contingency that's created with this addendum. The contract is contingent upon the seller obtaining written approval from the lien holders. Approval is necessary to enable the seller to close and convey title in accordance with this contract. So if we don't get all the lien holders to approve, then the seller can't convey clear marketable title. So that's a contingency. The buyer is going to go ahead and put down their earnest money. Again, the escrow agent's just going to hang on to it. If we find out that the lien holders aren't going to approve, or maybe the buyer decides to terminate, the party can terminate, and the earnest money deposit shall be refunded to the buyer. So again, until we get that short sale approval, until they get out of due diligence, after the short sale approval, they're not in risk of losing their earnest money. But they do need to put that money down to show their good faith, to show that they're a serious buyer. So they've been looking for, we've been in the short sale for, a couple months, and they find another property. We just terminate this, get their earnest money back, and go get them under contract with that other property. So they're not on the hook to buy until and if they get that approval that the lien holders, or that agreement that the lien holders have approved the short sale. We also have to address the dates. Again, I can't put in a specific date for due diligence or a specific date for settlement because I don't know what date we're going to get the lien holders approval. So the way we handle dates have to be a little bit different. This says due diligence shall extend through 5 p.m. on the 15th day following the seller's delivery to the buyer of the notice of approval. So due diligence is going to start the day after we get that notice of approval. Remember, when we're counting days in the contract, day 1 is always the day after. 15th is built in, 15 days for due diligence is built in, but you can see you can negotiate other time here. And then same thing with settlement. Settlement shall be on the 30th day or whatever day we agree to following seller's delivery notice of approval. Once the seller delivers that notice of approval to the buyer, that's when things start happening. That notice of approval saying all the lien holders are on board, and now the buyer can proceed with, loan approval, due diligence, all that other things, all that other. Until we get that notice of approval, everybody's just sitting still and being patient. The blue note tells us how to address dates in the contract itself. So instead of putting a date in 2T, we're just going to direct see attached short sale addendum and direct people here. And then another thing that makes short sales unique, we might be dealing with other offers. We might even be dealing with additional contracts. So no backup buyer, just additional contracts. So we're reminded that the rules of the North Carolina Real Estate Commission require offers from other buyers to be presented to the seller. So if we're under contract, get an offer, we have to present it. The commission also requires a seller's agent to inform lien holders of all offers and contracts on the sale received after a request for a short sale has been submitted. So what I'm telling you guys is buyer and seller negotiate and agree to terms, a contract is formed. We send that contract to the lien holders for them to start doing their process. Another offer comes in, seller can contract with another buyer. We can have multiple contracts because there's a contingency that says the seller only has to perform on the one that gets the approval from the lien holders. So the seller's not obligated to sell until they get that approval. So that could allow us for multiple contracts. The lien holders are going to want to have all the information when they're deciding to accepting this property or this contract. And again, for the lien holders, it comes down to time versus money. So which one's going to be quicker? Which one's going to get them the most money? Seller hereby represents to buyer that there is or is not an existing contract. Offers from other buyers may be accepted by the seller and become a contract. Seller or the lien holders may elect to substitute an additional sales contract for approval by lien holders. Withdraw this contract from consideration. Unless the contract's been terminated, seller shall promptly notify buyer in writing of the occurrence of any of the following. So if the seller accepts another contract, if the lien holders want to substitute a contract, short sale approval, or seller's closing on another contract. So this just got real interesting, didn't it? Again, we're not saying multiple offers. We're saying multiple contracts. If not sooner terminated, contract shall become null and void upon the completion of the closing, whether or not seller notifies buyer of any such closing. And again, the earnest money deposit shall be refunded to the buyer. The only time the buyer's in risk of losing their earnest money is if the short sale approval happens, they get through due diligence, and then they terminate after due diligence. They're just going to deposit it in the escrow account for safekeeping. Seller represents they have or have not filed foreclosure. Seller represents they are or are not under bankruptcy protection. And then seller is advised to seek advice from, and they're told, call everybody, call your attorney, call your accountant, call any other professional regarding credit, legal, and tax consequences of a short sale. Buyer signs on the left, seller signs on the right. And then the fourth page, once the seller finds out from the lien holders that they've approved, then the seller is going to give written notice of approval of the short sale to the buyer. They can use page 4 of this contract to let them know that their short sale has been approved. And like I said, now that we have that, we can start pushing towards closing and getting this thing to happen. So Kelly, for your short sale, were you the listing agent or the buyer's agent? You're on mute, I'm sorry.
I was the purchaser.
Oh, you were the buyer.
Yeah, I was the buyer.
Oh, fun.
I had just gotten my license and I didn't feel comfortable doing it without somebody else doing it for me, so.
Right.
And I
Nice.
walked through the process with my agent, but I wasn't the actual agent.
Gotcha. Good for you. Good for you. You know, I was fortunate, my 11 and a, it's funny to say that, my 11 and a half month, if I have to look for my silver lining here, my 11 and a half month short sale, the listing agent, her email posted herself as a short sale and foreclosure specialist. And my first thought was, goodness, that's a heck of a way to make a living. But if you're good at it, and you know what you're doing, you definitely have a niche there. And we were so lucky the second time with my 11 and a half month one, because that listing agent knew her stuff. She was on it, but still with all that, there was nothing she could do about the process. With my 11 and a half month one, I mean, y'all, these guys had like 3 mortgages. They had a failed startup business on the property. They had an outstanding lien to the IRS. I don't know how much you know about the IRS, but I'm telling you right now, they're not known for their rapid response. I mean, there was a lot going on in this one, and we had to wait for everybody to say aye. That's what took us so dang long, was we just had a lot of lien holders out there that had to approve it. Understanding if one of them said no, then this would be a done deal. My buyers would have had to go find something else. I think, again, my crystal ball, I think we're going to see short sales come back. I think in foreclosures, I don't think it's going to be like it was in the housing market crash, but I do think we'll see short sales and foreclosures come back. I think there's got to be some kind of consequence to the market we were in, where buyers were paying $50,000, $75,000 more than asking price. You know, they don't have as much value in the home. They don't have as much equity. And if they can't make those payments, or if they have to sell early, I think we're going to start seeing short sales and foreclosures come back. So if we start seeing them coming in again, hopefully your firm will offer some training, make sure you're proceeding. If they don't, then you need to, before you agree to take this listing or work with this buyer, just to make sure that everybody's proceeding properly. I know when these are starting to gain in popularity around the housing market crash, my firm had an attorney come to our sales meeting. So we had a whole hour with an attorney to learn about these, ask questions, everything we thought we wanted to know about a short sale. Thoughts on this? My 11 and a half month short sale were like really good friends of mine too, on top of everything else. There's something to be said about doing business with family and friends. I'm just going to leave it at that. We're still friends today. It's all good. That was a rough time. Anything at all about the forms? I know we went through a lot. Again, just having a basic understanding of what they do, knowing in practice in the real world, when we're ready to use them, we're going to sit down and read them, make sure we're clear. We kind of looked at, last weekend, we looked at ncrc.gov, the Real Estate Commission's website. And, you know, there's a plethora of information on here to help educate the consumer. Information, if it's on the commission's website, then we're allowed to use it as well. So we can use these tools that the commission's created to help educate the consumer. And I know where we looked the other day, it's worth pointing out again, probably one of the places I come the most on the commission's website is publications. So you click on the publications tab and then you click on publications. And seriously, one of my favorite features are these Q&A brochures. So just in this class alone, we've talked about the closing process. We've talked about due diligence, earnest money. Here's home inspections, offer and acceptance. So a lot of these things we've talked about in this class, they have a Q&A brochure. Now I have these in the online learning system for you guys if you want to look them over. But I just want to remind you that they're here. You know, if you have a buyer really struggling to understand the due diligence, you may want to consider using this brochure to help explain it to them, right? Stop trying to recreate the wheel. They put this stuff, they allow us to use this stuff to help make our jobs, our lives easier. Another thing I want to point out on the commission's website, you guys right now, we're accessing the current law and the current rule. But once you get through post, you're not going to have access to Carolina Schools Online Learning System, for example. So it's important that we always know where to access the current law and the current rule, because you may find yourself in a situation, you know, what would the commission say? And you need to know where to get that information. So if we look at ncrec.gov, and I'm on the home page, and if I scroll down near the bottom, one of the categories here is license, law, and rule. We'll look at that in a second. But the other thing I want to point out, our proposed law and rule changes, these things are taking effect on July 1st. So if you want to know the law and rule changes that are happening, you can click on these links. The other thing you may want to consider is subscribing to the commission's mailing list. So when there is a law and rule, a proposed law and rule change, you'll get that email notification. They'll send it right to you so you can look at it. Making sure that we're always current. We know what's going on with our commissioners, with the governing body that regulates our license. What I wanted to point out though was this license, law, and rule. There's several places on the commission's website that you can access this, but I think the homepage is always a great place to start. Chapter 93A is the license law. Chapter 58 is the commission rule. So you can see they both have a link. And you know what I like about it, when it loads, it kind of breaks it down into each rule. So specifically, you can kind of peruse the different topics for what you're looking for if you don't know the rule number. So the current is always going to be on the website. So when you've been out of post licensing for 5 years, 10 years, and you have a question about the rule and you don't know where to go, come to the commission's website. Specifically the other day when we were talking about offer and sales contracts, we mentioned rule A.0112. This is the rule that says brokers, we can use any sales contract. We just don't have to use NCAR forms. We can use any sales contract. But when rule A.112 says, I had too many ones, A.112 says that if we are using an NCAR contract, it needs to have these 19 provisions in here. So we said our NCAR forms obviously have these. But if you need to use something, maybe it's a builder contract, you may want to check this out to make sure that that builder contract is in compliance and you as the broker in the transaction can use that contract. So again, just being familiar with the commission site where you can find various things. And again, I do suggest at least thinking about signing up for this mailing list so you can be on the front line of any changes, things that come your way. You can know the proposed. I mean, there's going to be a rule change coming for the RPODs, and I've known about that for like 6 months now, just because I was on that mailing list. They're not changing the look of the RPODs, they're just changing a rule around the RPODs. Hopefully you guys too have started receiving the commission's e-bulletins. They send these out once a month. You should be getting an email. Boy, they are spot on. If it's not the last day of the month, it's the first of the month. They are very timely with these things. You can get some past issues here if you want to go back. If you're not getting the email, you're going to want to make sure you sign up for it. And it's in the commission's website. Want to make sure you're signing up for it so you can get that notice. The email is the way for the commission to communicate with all of us like once a month. I think we've mentioned there's like 110,000 licensees in the state of North Carolina. And there's like 40 some people that work at the commission. So one way they can communicate with all of us, updates are these e-bulletins. So please make sure you're getting it. And when you get it, read it, because there's maybe information in there for your business. You guys seen those e-bulletins yet? Go into the disciplinary actions first. That tends to be where we go first, isn't it? Who got in trouble? What did they do? Look at those disciplinary actions, you guys. Not that we want to tattletale on anybody, but if you're seeing agents, you know what you're seeing, for example, a lot in the disciplinary actions lately is mishandling of material facts. So if you see mishandling of material facts over and over and over and over and over and over again, hopefully that means something to you. Other agents have gotten in trouble for mishandling material facts. You know, we could too if we're not properly handling them. So use that as kind of a learning tool, not a shaming tool. So the last little piece, and then we're going to get through this, and then we'll kind of talk about what tomorrow's going to look like. We're in good shape. I need you guys to bring me some questions tomorrow or things that you want to talk about, so we can get anything addressed. So let's go through this, and then we'll talk about what tomorrow's going to look like. Anytime you guys have a post licensing or a CE class with the commission, then you're going to have this other topics section. So they just want to make sure that we understand our license status and our education issues. It blows my mind how many agents practicing today have no idea what a current license means. They have no idea what their status is. So this is why you guys see it over and over and over again. So hopefully you know what you what you need to do to keep your license active and current. So this is from the most recent general update. I don't have it in the book anywhere. It's just from the License Law and Commission Rule. So in this section, we're going to talk about the difference between a current and an expired license. We're going to talk about the difference between an active and an inactive license. We're going to talk about you guys, not behind your back, but we're going to talk about you guys as provisional brokers. And then we're going to talk about your CE. So I think the first question licensees need to ask themselves, the first thing we need to know is my license current or expired? Maybe it's active, maybe it's not. The first step is to determine if your license is current or expired. And the difference of the two, how you have a current license is because you pay the fee. When you guys see the word current, as a matter of fact, how about you see the word currency? A current license has everything to do with paying the fee. It has nothing to do with that or with education. So if you pay the fee each year during the renewal period, the commission does not work on a calendar year. They work on a physical year. And their physical year is July 1st to June 30th every single year. Our licenses expire unless we pay the renewal fee by 11:59 p.m. on June 30th. The renewal period every year is May 15th to June 30th. We have this window between May 15th and June 30th to pay that renewal fee. This year and last year, and I can't remember how many years now it's been, the renewal fee has been $45. So one way to remember this is we have 45 days to pay $45. You can go online. You all have an account. Now that you have a license, you can go to the commission's website, access your account, and pay your renewal fee then. Always pay the fee. Have you guys paid your fees yet? If you haven't, we need to get on it like this week, right? June 30th, 11:59. Please, please, please do it when we log out. So that way you won't forget. So the first step is determine is your license current or expired. I don't care about education for a current or expired license. All we care about is, did you pay the fee? Questions on that piece of it? A current license then can be active or it can be inactive. So there's really only two steps. Once you've dropped this provisional status, there's really only two steps to have an active license. You pay the fee and you do your CE. It rhymes and everything, doesn't it? Pay the fee, do your CE. We'll talk about CE in a minute. Renewal fee, paying the fee makes it current. Completing your education gives you an active license. As a provisional broker, you guys know you have to do a third step to have an active license. What else do you need to do as a PB to have an active license? You paid the fee, you did your education. I'm seeing mouths move. What else do you have to do?
Affiliate with a broker.
You have to affiliate with a BIC. So as a PB, pay the fee. We'll talk about CE in a second. Do your post on time. And affiliate with a broker. As a PB, you have an active license. Your current license could also be inactive. Understand, it's current because you paid the fee. But it's inactive because you either failed to do education, you failed to do your CE or your post licensing in time. You're a PB without a BIC. You just got a big kissy, didn't you? You got a PB without a BIC. Or you can choose to be inactive. You could choose to ride the rest of your life on an inactive license. All you have to do is send that fee in, that $45. Why would you want to do that? I will talk about that in just 1 second. I'm going to try to persuade you all to pay that $45 every year. And I'll tell you why in just 1 second. So you're inactive, you're current, you paid the fee, but you're inactive either because you're delinquent on education or by choice. So let's say you've been inactive and you wake up one day and you say, I want to activate my license. How you activate an inactive license depends on if you have any CE deficiency. If you've been inactive and you do not have a deficiency, all you got to do is submit the form. You're current. So now you just tell them, I don't want to be inactive anymore. I want to be active. If you've been inactive for less than 2 years and you have a CE deficiency, they're going to make you do this year's. When we say year, we're referring to the commission's year. So for example, we're getting ready to go into their next year, which is July 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024. So that's the commission's year. So if you're inactive for less than 2 years and you have a CE deficiency, they're going to make you do this year's CE, and they're going to make you do an elective or two to get caught up on your education. Once you satisfy their CE requirements, submit the form, and you're active again. If you're inactive for more than 2 years with a CE deficiency, they're going to make you do this year's CE, and then they're going to make you come back and take 2 of the 3 post-licensing classes. You can choose which 2. You want to do 301, 302, or 303 again, but they're going to make you 2. The thinking is, you guys, without CE, if you're not doing CE, you're missing important updates, you're missing important material. I think we've all learned or realized that real estate is a fast-moving industry. And if you're not getting the education, it's easy to get left behind. So if you've been 2 years, you're coming back to post-licensing, whichever 2 of your choices. My recommendation to you guys, if you do choose to be inactive for a while, so I'm just going to send that $45 in every year to keep an inactive license. One thing to consider is doing CE at least every other year. Because if you do it every other year, then you have less than a 2-year CE deficiency. Does this make sense? So when you're ready to activate, you just got to take some CE, submit the form, and you can get back in. If you want to be inactive for 10 years without CE, you got to do some more work. to activate. So again, that's just a suggestion. You could take CE every year. You could take CE on an inactive license. So if you think this is what happens, something happens in life. We get to this fork of road and this, the fork in the road of life, and we think we're going to be done with real estate. You know, maybe you get another job opportunity. Maybe you're going to put real estate on the back burner or start a family or to care for an elderly parent, right? You think you're done with real estate. I do recommend sending in that $45 every year in the event that you want to get back into real estate later. And if you can pull off and do CE, that'll help with your CE deficiency. Reinstating an inactive license. Any questions on this? So what happens if you don't pay the fee? Failure to pay the fee by 11:59 p.m. on June 30th means at the stroke of midnight, what's the status of your license? The stroke of midnight on July 1st, what's the status of your license?
Expired.
It's expired. Pay the fee, you're current. Don't pay the fee, you're expired. I don't care if you've done CE or not, makes no difference. So you don't pay that fee at midnight on July 1st, your license is expired. So now the question comes in, how do you reinstate an expired license? And the answer to that depends on how long it's been expired. If you wake up on July 1st and go, oh, gosh, I didn't pay my fee, are you kidding me? Anything less than 6 months, you're going to pay the renewal fee, you're going to pay a reinstatement fee, and poof, you're active again, assuming you did your CE. If your license is expired for more than 6 months, but less than 2 years, you're going to pay the 2 fees, renewal fee and reinstatement fee. And then you're going to come back and do one post licensing of your choosing, or you're going to go back to PSI Testing Center and pass both sections of the state exam again. Given the choice, which one are you going to do? Which one is most of us going to do? I would vote for post licensing over PSI. What do you guys think? Yeah, if I have the choice, I think most of us would agree. Let's go suffer through 30 hours of post again and not have to go back to PSI Testing Center. But you have a choice. If your license is expired for more than 2 years and you decide you want to reinstate it, looky what happens. You have to start all over. You have to start on day 1 of pre-licensing. Pass the end of class exam, go to PSI Testing Center, pass that, sit through your post-licensing again. In a sense, you're starting over as a new agent. And again, the reason being is because the lack of education. Things happen in 2 years. And if you've not had that education, you're behind. So they're going to make you start all over. So remember earlier when I said, I recommend considering riding the rest of your life on an inactive license. I recommend just sending in that $45 every year. Even if you think you're done with real estate, send in that $45. Because what I'm trying to prevent is your license to expire. I'm trying to prevent seeing you guys in pre-licensing. As much as I enjoy you, I don't want to see you guys in pre-licensing. Pay the fee. Is it worth it? I can't really answer that for you. But what do you guys think? Is it worth it? I do. I can't tell you how many times this happened, how many people I've had in my pre-licensing class that are a victim of this. Please, please, please don't let this get away from you. So current versus expired. Current means you paid the fee during the renewal period. Expired means you didn't. Current license can be active. Current license can be inactive. Questions on that? Let's talk about you guys, my PBs. I call you guys my brokers with training wheels. Y'all can ride your bikes, but you can't do it without your training wheels, otherwise known as your BIC. As a PB, You can do just about everything that a full broker can do, as long as you have that direct supervision of a broker in charge. As long as you have a BIC that agreed to take you under their wing. To remove your provisional status, all you have to do is complete 90 hours of post licensing within 8 months. Nope, 18 months. Sorry. 18 months. So you have what, a year and a half to take 90 hours. I think most of you, this is your third, right? Hand up if this is your third. Yeah, a good chunk of you. So you guys are good. If this isn't your third, please just watch your time, you guys. Don't let this 18 months get away from you. When you look at your license, it has a date on it. That date is your licensing date. That starts your 18-month clock. As a provisional broker, if you don't get all 90 hours done within 18 months, you are inactive until it's complete. Imagine you're in the throes of working with a buyer or seller. Time gets away from you. You get busy. Post licensing doesn't become important. 18 months hits. You're in the throes of a transaction. And your license goes inactive because you didn't do post licensing. What can they do? So please don't let that time get away from you. Also understand that post licensing does not count towards CE. CE doesn't count towards post. Post doesn't count towards CE. They're two different things. They're two different departments down at the commission. CE is geared towards all licensees, all of us across the state. Post licensing is directed towards newbies, we'll call you, brand new licensees. So they're two different things for two different purposes. There used to be a rule that says you can't do overlapping post licensing, like you couldn't overlap two classes. It was like 7 hours a week. They've done away with that. You could do all three at the same time if you really wanted to. I wouldn't recommend that unless you're on like your 17th month or something and you need to. But on typically, I know the brokers that have wanted to knock out posts as fast as they possibly can. So they're doing 2 at a time. Guys, their heads hurt by the time they're done. Their brain's a little mushy. So if you don't have to rush that process, you can get through it fast enough. So for those of us that is their last post, when we pass tomorrow, your provisional broker status removed, provisional status removed, do you have to wait for a new license from the commission? They will notify you. They'll probably send you, they'll make you a new pocket card available because right now your pocket card says PB on it. But as far as sending you a new physical license, no, you've gotten the license you're going to get. What they will do is provide you with that new pocket card. And then anytime you change any kind of status with the commission, they mail you a little thing in the mail that lets you know what they think you are. So that way you can make sure. So they'll send you something too, letting you know your provisional status was removed. Bless you. We'll talk about tomorrow what you guys, if this is your first post, we'll talk about tomorrow about your what that you can expect from Lane and how that process works a little bit. I definitely want you guys, again, if this is your first or if you've not done it, anytime you complete a post licensing class or a CE, give it about a week and then log into your account on ncrec.gov and make sure that that credit has posted to your account. Don't wait until you get a notice from the commission that says your license is inactive because you didn't do post. And you say, well, I thought I did. So you guys need to check it. But again, give it a week. Lane's got to process it. The commission's got to process it. People got to touch it. Questions about PBs or post or anything about you guys?
I do have a quick question.
Please.
So what happens if you don't, I mean, it just like if you don't pass in time or whatever, you just go on inactive and then you just until you eventually get it.
Yep, that's exactly. And Sharon, you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's not just taking post licensing, you're not just signing up for it. you got to complete it. You got to pass all 3 of those tests.
Okay.
So, again, if you're close to your time, get going. But I hope most of you guys are okay. I taught this same class in person the last couple weeks. So I've been with you. They just finished Thursday. So we've been running parallel. I had a young man in my in-person class that was inactive because he went over his 18 months. He'd been affiliated with a firm. He was working with buyers and sellers. He totally fell in that category. He said, I got busy in my new career. My wife got pregnant, so he just had a lot going on. And next thing he knew, it was 18 months and his real estate firm said, you're inactive. So now he's scrambling around trying to get this done so he can get back at it. That's heartbreaking to hear. So just don't let that time get away from you. They're not going to call and remind you. This is a date that we need to be aware of. Anything else? Again, anything at all about you guys, post licensing? And then we have CE. So each year, I do have some good news for you guys in just a second, but for the most part, each year, we want that active license. The second piece of an active license is we have to do CE. So every year you want an active license. We do 8 hours of CE a year. 4 hours are an update. There's 2 different updates. Your license category depends on which update you take. If you are a provisional broker or a full broker, you do the general update, also known as the Gen Up. If you are BIC eligible or you're a designated broker in charge, you do the broker in charge update, also known as the BIC Up. To get credit for the update, you have to do the right one for whatever your license is. So many times agents, BICs go to the Gen Up, they're not going to get credit for their update if they don't do the BIC Up. Does this make sense? If you as a full broker wind up in the BIC Up, you're not going to get credit for your update if you don't do the right one. So make sure you're in the right class always. The second CE that we have to do each year is a 4-hour elective. And the elective, use this to your advantage because the elective is a topic of your choosing. So what's your niche? What do you want to learn more about? What's your area? What's your focus? I'm going to throw it out there and venture to say, name a topic. There's probably an elective for it. So you can choose something that can help give you some knowledge, help enhance your education. 2 birds, 1 stone. Again, 8 hours a year, which really, you talk to some other licensing boards, 8 hours a year is nothing. You get into like nursing and they got to do like 32 hours every other year or something crazy like that. I mean, they have a lot more education. So really 8 hours a year is not bad. You do not have tests in CE. Once you're through post, you're done with end of class exams. Do we want to pause and celebrate there? No more tests. Okay. The only time you could see a test in CE is if you're doing asynchronous elective. Asynchronous is also known as self-paced. So if you're doing a self-paced elective, they will give you a test at the end of each section to make sure you're sitting there paying attention. Self-paced is not an option for the update, only for the elective. So as long as you are in person or on Zoom, you just have to be present. With our CE, the CE deadline every single year is when? When's our CE deadline?
June 10th.
June 10th. June 10th, June 10th, June 10th. This date needs to be up there. Dates of importance, like your birthday, anniversary, Christmas. Very important date. Here's the deal, you guys. CE deadline is June 10th every year. The commission has a blackout period between June 11th and June 30th. What I mean by that is no education provider in the state can offer elective from June 11th to June 30th for credit. So the deadline is June 10th. Remember I just said there's like 110,000 licensees and there's like 40 some people down at the commission. All of us are renewing all at the same time. All of us are wrapping up our CE all at the same time. By cutting off CE on June 10th, they're giving everything time to process. They got to make sure everybody gets that credit. My recommendation to you guys, please don't wait until June 10th to do CE. Usually the CE material is available for the new year, July or so. A lot of schools start offering CE again in August or September. So my recommendation is get CE done when you can. A lot of times agents will say that we tend to be slower in the winter months. So December, January may be a slower time for us sales wise. So I think that's a good opportunity to knock out our CE. So we have it done before the spring market. And now we have time working with buyers and sellers and we don't have to take 8 hours off. If you're a daredevil and you want to wait till the last minute, just understand the risks. Because the commission says if you miss more than 20 minutes for any reason, you're not going to get credit for the CE class. So let's say you're a daredevil and you decide you're going to do CE on June 10th and you're going to do it via Zoom. And you wake up that morning to log into Zoom and somebody hit the power pole in front of your house and knocked out your internet. What can they do about it if you can't log on? Same thing in person. You go out to your driveway that morning, you get your car and you have a flat tire and you can't get to the location. What can you do about it? Anything can happen on June 10th. And if it does, and you miss more than 20 minutes, on July 1st, assuming you've paid the fee, on July 1st, your license is going to be inactive. Please, please, please don't wait till the last minute. So many horror stories, so many over the years. Once upon a time ago, I was kind of the lane of a real estate school. And I'm telling you guys right now, on June 11th, I hated going to work on June 11th because on June 11th, my phone was blowing up. I miss CE. What do I do? Get it closed because on July 1st, your license is going to be inactive. There's nothing we can do about that. So you guys promise me we're not going to wait till the last minute. We're going to knock it out because we're not going to be another story in Julie's real estate class, right? every year, and it's heartbreaking. Good news for you guys. You want some good news? Your first renewal period, you don't have to do CE. You get your first year CE off. Make sure you pay the fee. So this is what I need you guys to do. The day you get your license, look at a calendar. The first time you hit June 10th, you don't have to do CE. The next time you hit June 10th, you have to do CE. You get your first renewal period off. Pay the fee. I'd be willing to bet most of you just got your first renewal period off for CE. All right, you've had your one and done. You got to do CE now. And again, even if this was your first year off from CE, you still have to pay the fee. Always pay the fee. When in doubt, just send them money. They'll figure out what to do with it. They say they may grant an extension for CE due to a hardship. I'm telling you right now, a hardship is not, I got busy and I forgot. A hardship is something like active military deployment, for example. Interestingly enough, the pandemic was considered a hardship. They granted CE extensions in 2020, but we still had to pay the fee. Always, always, always pay the fee. Questions? so this is where we are. We're gonna get out a little early. Don't go anywhere just yet. So we will get out a little early. But we need to talk about what tomorrow is gonna look like. Tomorrow, for your test, we'll go over rules and expectations for the exam. Maybe you've taken a test with Carolina School of Real Estate, another instructor. I'm gonna tell you tomorrow how I give my exam. So we're gonna make sure we're on the same page for my rules and expectations. You guys make sure tonight you go ahead and print out your blank closing disclosure. Remember, I will let you bring a blank CD tomorrow. I will also let you guys have scratch paper. Before we start the test, I'm going to verify that all are blank. So we'll need to do a little one-on-one check-in time. So you can go ahead and start gathering your stuff tonight. If you haven't been basic calculator shopping yet, run out to Walgreens tonight and get you a calculator. Because when we check in tomorrow, I need to see your basic as well. Make sure it doesn't have, store formulas or you're not using your phone. So those are things you guys can do tonight to make sure you're ready. So tomorrow when we come together, we'll do our closing disclosure number 4 problem. So let's refresh where that is. Our homework recommendation under the section 4 settlement statement, we're doing CD number 4. Yes, you have the solutions here. No, that's not going to help you prepare for your test. So I do recommend, if you haven't done it yet, please look at this tonight. We'll go over this tomorrow. Again, it'll give us a good opportunity to refresh on prorating, interim interest, that kind of thing. I got a little review put together for us for tomorrow, because I understand you guys have gotten a lot of information in a very short time together, haven't we? Hopefully not so much learning new stuff as we are expanding on what we already knew. So what I want to do tomorrow with the review is just kind of hone in on the things that are important. We'll take a break and then we'll start the test, and we really don't have much more to cover. Obviously, want to make sure we're good on the CD and prorations and address any of your questions. Bring all your questions tomorrow. We'll get to it and be done and check another one off your list. Or is anybody, this is your first one? Is this your first post? Anybody? Gabriel? All right, so Gabe, you can check one off. I think most of you are done after tomorrow. So eek, yay. And then you just got to do CE. What questions do I have? Comments, concerns, thoughts on life?
So do you have a breakdown of like which questions are out of what section or anything like that?
Not necessarily. But we only covered 3 chapters. So 10, 11, and 14. 10 was very basic. We got through that one pretty quickly. So I wouldn't spend as much time in 10. So you want to make sure you review 11 and 14. Few questions from 10. What else? All right. Once again, no partying tonight. Remember, we gotta focus in the morning. We can party tomorrow night. How about that? So we're gonna focus in the morning. We're gonna get a good night's sleep. So we're ready to take a test tomorrow. We'll knock it out and be done. You guys think of any questions tonight? Don't hesitate to reach out to me. But otherwise, I'll see you guys at 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow. Good night. Thank you. Good night.
See you then.
Good night.